Would you believe me if I told you that a simple dream, seemingly random, saved a woman's life? What if I told you that this dream was not just a figment of her imagination, but rather a divine sign, one spiritual alert coming from something much bigger? It may seem impossible to some, but what you are about to hear now is a true story that has everything to mess with you. Imagine waking up with your heart racing, with an image etched in your mind, as if you had actually experienced it. A road, a car, a soft but firm voice saying, "Don't go down that road tomorrow." What would you do? Would you ignore it as just another dream, or would you listen to what might have been an angelic message? Stay with me until the end, because what happened to Clara, our protagonist, can make you see life with different eyes. An ordinary woman like so many others, mother, wife, worker, someone who never thought of having contact with something supernatural, but who at a crucial moment felt that something invisible was protecting her. Maybe you've experienced something similar, that strange feeling of danger, that unexpected delay that saved you from something, or even a dream so clear which seemed more like a warning than a fantasy. The spiritual universe is full of mysteries, and when we talk about interventions of angels, many people still think that these are just beautiful stories, created to comfort hearts. But what happens when these stories repeat themselves? When thousands of people around the world report similar signs? Is it really a coincidence? Or are we surrounded by divine presences that guide us even when we don't realize it? In this video, we'll dive into one of those amazing stories. And the most impressive thing is that a single detail in that dream was enough to save a life. The line between the physical and spiritual worlds can be more blurred than we realize. And sometimes all we need to do is pay attention to the signs. Have you ever had a feeling so strong that you felt it in your body? Have you ever dreamed of something that seemed more like a warning than a simple dream? Have you ever felt that someone invisible was by your side, protecting you in silence? If your answer is yes, perhaps you too have experienced a subtle form of divine intervention. And if the answer is no, perhaps this story will awaken in you a new sensitivity, a new way of looking at the little warnings that life sends. This is not just a moving narrative, it is an invitation to reflect, a call for you to pay more attention to the whispers of the invisible, to the messages that arrive in silence, to the voices that speak while the world sleeps. Because in the end, the question that remains is, how many times have God or his angels tried to warn you, and you didn't notice? Now hold on tight, because the story of Clarice is about to begin, and what she experienced that morning will surprise you in a way you never imagined. Now hold on tight, because the story of Clarice is about to begin, and what she experienced that morning will surprise you in a way you never imagined. But before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever experienced something that seemed impossible to explain? A dream come true? A deliverance that didn't make sense? But deep down you knew it wasn't just a coincidence? If this topic resonates with you, leave here in the comments what touched you the most so far. Sharing your experience may be just what someone else needs to read today, and without knowing it, you may become a channel of light in someone's life. If you are feeling this connection, this shiver, this desire to know more about the invisible signs that surround us, like this video right now. It may seem like a small gesture, but it has a huge impact. It helps the content reach other people who, like you, are seeking answers, comfort, and spiritual understanding. People who are thirsty for stories that speak to the soul. And if you believe that there are things that go far beyond what the eyes can see, if you feel that there is something greater guiding our steps, subscribe here to the channel. Because every week we bring you real, inspiring stories, often mysterious but always full of purpose. Stories that remind us that the invisible is more present than we imagine. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach even more hearts. Now take a deep breath and prepare to dive into the morning that Clara woke up with a restless heart and made a decision based on a dream that would change the course of his life forever. This is the story of Clara, a woman like so many others, someone who could perhaps be your neighbor, a childhood friend, or even someone from your own family. She was not famous, she was not known for great deeds, nor did she live a life of excess. On the contrary, Clara was a simple, discreet woman, the kind who finds beauty in the little things of everyday life. Mother of 2 children, hard-working, devoted wife and always very sensitive to matters of the soul, her routine was similar to that of many women. She woke up early, made coffee, packed the children's backpacks, went to work, and in the midst of all this she still found time to take care of the house and pay attention to her elderly mother, who lived in the neighborhood next door. Clara didn't complain. Even though she was tired with her bills piling up and the days seeming the same, she was grateful for life as best she could. "At least we're healthy," she would repeat quietly before going to sleep. But there was something different about her, a type of perception that not everyone has. Clara always felt like there was an invisible force around her, as if there was something trying to communicate all the time. Little premonitions, sensations that appeared without explanation, intense dreams that seemed more real than reality itself. Things that most people ignore, but that she could never let go unnoticed. And that's exactly what happened that night. On the eve of an ordinary day, a Tuesday without anything special, Clara had a dream that made her wake up with her heart racing. In the dream, she was driving along a familiar road on her way to visit her mother, but something was different. The landscape was shrouded in thick fog, and at a certain point she saw a truck speeding past, losing control. Everything happened very quickly. The screech of the brakes, the impact, and then silence. Waking up, sweaty and with tears in her eyes, Clara tried to ignore her fear. "It was just a nightmare, that's all," she whispered to herself. But something inside her wouldn't let that go. It was as if the dream had left a mark, a deep and silent message like a hidden truth wanting to emerge. She tried to follow her routine as she always did, but that day was not like any other. There was a tension in the air. The same streets seemed heavier, the clock was ticking slower, and the mere sound of a truck in the distance made her heart race. It was as if it were carrying a warning. A subtle but urgent code. At lunchtime, when she was getting ready to leave by car for her mother's house, as she did every Tuesday, Clara stopped for a moment. The hand was already on the key, but the body did not obey. Something was holding her back. And then she remembered a detail from the dream that made her freeze. The clothes I wore in the dream were exactly the same ones I had chosen that morning, without thinking. That's when everything changed. Clara, without fully understanding why, decided not to go. She sent a message to her mother, saying that she had been feeling a little unwell and that she would be fine the next day. The feeling that I was making the right decision was as strong as the fear I felt. She didn't know it, but she had just escaped something terrible. Hours later, the news came on local television. A truck had overturned on the road between his neighborhood and his mother's, exactly in the same stretch that she used to pass at the same time. The driver had lost control on a curve, and the impact involved 2 cars that were right behind. The accident was serious. One of the victims did not survive. Clara was paralyzed. It was no longer a premonition or a simple dream. This was an intervention, a clear warning, a divine sign, silent but real, a gesture of protection that perhaps came from an angel, a guardian spirit, or perhaps even from an energy that transcends everything we can explain. She knew with all the certainty of her being that I wasn't alone at that moment. And it is at this point that many people ask themselves, will these warnings reach everyone? How many times do we ignore the signs because we are distracted, because we don't believe, or because we think it's all a coincidence? Perhaps what is missing is not the presence of the signs, but our openness to listening to them. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happened to Clara was not an isolated case. There are many similar stories, stories of ordinary people who, for some mysterious reason, were touched by something greater. People who escaped death by seconds, who changed their path on impulse and later understood why. There is something behind these scenes of life that deserves to be explored more carefully. Comment here. That makes sense to me if, in some way, you have also experienced something similar, or if you felt a silent presence guiding you when you needed it. Clara had barely laid her head on the pillow that night, when sleep took her completely. But it was no ordinary sleep. It was as if she had been pulled into another plane, as if reality had changed color and density. The atmosphere was hazy, with tones between blue and gray, and everything seemed enveloped by a silence that weighed on the air. Even without seeing anyone, she knew she was not alone. Something, or someone, was watching her with a firm but non-threatening presence. Ahead of her, a road formed. It wasn't exactly the road she usually took to visit her mother, but there was something about it that seemed familiar. The asphalt seemed to float in the void, and around it, a dry and lifeless field stretched out, as if everything there was waiting for something to happen. A white car, just like hers, appeared in the distance, moving slowly. In the driver's seat, she herself. But there was no emotion on her face. It was as if it were just a reflection, a duplicate of her, acting on instinct. Suddenly, a curve. The car hesitates, and then a voice. Clara could never describe where that voice came from. It was neither male nor female, neither low nor high. But it was clear, penetrating, almost as if it were an idea materialized. The message was direct, like a whisper that cut through time. Don't take that road tomorrow. At the same moment, everything went dark. The road disappeared beneath his feet. She fell, or rather was swallowed up by a dense, almost liquid darkness. He woke up with a jolt, his heart pounding like a drum, his hands freezing cold and his body covered in sweat. He was breathing heavily, as if he had run a marathon. All around, everything was quiet. Only the sound of the clock on the kitchen wall echoed in the silence of the early morning, marking 3:33 a.m. She stared at the ceiling for long minutes, trying to understand what that meant. Was it just a dream? A message? A warning? It wasn't. Like the other dreams she had, the formless, disjointed ones that disappeared seconds after waking. This remained intact in the memory, like a mark engraved on the skin. There was something in the air, as if the dream was never over, as if you were just waiting for an answer. During breakfast, Clara didn't mention anything to her family. She watched the children getting ready for school, her husband leafing through the newspaper, and wondered how everything could be so calm on the outside, when inside she was still in a frenzy. The phrase kept reverberating, "Don't take that road tomorrow," but why? What would happen if she ignored it? Later, when he finally decided not to leave the house that day, relief came like an invisible hug. It was like she had passed a test she didn't even know she was taking. And late in the afternoon, when she heard the news about the accident on the road she always used, something inside her changed place. Fear, yes, but also a kind of reverence, a silent recognition that there was something bigger going on behind the scenes in his life. She spent the next few days in a state of heightened awareness. Sounds seemed clearer, the gestures of those around her carried hidden meanings, and time. Time seemed to be showing her that it wasn't as linear as we thought. That perhaps there were cracks in everyday life through which truths that couldn't be put into words were escaping. And then came the second dream. But before I talk about him, I want to touch on something important, because maybe you're wondering, have I ever had a warning like this and let it pass? And look, maybe yes. Sometimes signs don't come as clear words or strong images. Sometimes they come as a sudden feeling of discomfort, an idea that keeps coming back, an intuition. That seems out of place, but deep down it has a purpose. The truth is that we are all going through silent journeys, and some encounters with the invisible, like Clara's, happen precisely to remind us that there is more than routine, more than meets the eye, more than the control we think we have. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because that first dream was not an isolated event. He was the first step in a transformation that Clara didn't even know she was about to experience. What seemed to be just a warning turned out to be the beginning of something much bigger, a calling, a tear in the fabric of reality that began to reveal hidden truths about life, time, and what really guides us when we think we are alone. Write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too," if at any point in your life you have ever felt that there was something protecting you, even if you couldn't explain exactly what. The next day, Clara woke up surrounded by a fog of uncertainty. The sun barely entered through the crack in the curtain, but his eyes were already open, fixed on the ceiling. as if searching for an answer there that would not come. I could still feel the echo of the dream on my skin. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a restlessness, as if he'd received a letter with no return address and was now trying to decipher each word between the invisible lines. She felt torn. Part of her wanted to believe that it was all just a random creation of the subconscious. The other part, silent and deep, whispered that this was more than a nocturnal reverie, and that's when the hardest battle began, the one that no one sees, but that everyone has fought inside. The fight between what logic screams and what intuition whispers. Clara has always been a woman of rational decisions, used to lists, schedules, forecasts. He was proud of his mental organization, of the objective way he dealt with problems. But what now? How to organize a feeling that didn't fit into any argument? How could she apply logic to an experiment that defied everything she could touch, measure, or prove? As she ate breakfast, the automatic gestures of her routine contrasted with the turmoil inside her. Each sip of coffee felt like an effort to maintain normality, but the truth was that that voice still echoed, and more than that, it was now part of her. Clara looked out the window and wondered if other people were going through the same thing. If, behind the serious expressions and the scheduled commitments, there wasn't also a silent field of doubts and ignored signs. It was strange to admit, but a part of her was scared. Not from the dream itself, but from what it awakened. What if it really had been a warning? What if there was something trying to protect her, guide her, or even test her? These questions left no room for simple answers. It wasn't like solving an equation, but more like diving into a dark river without knowing where you were stepping. And at the same time, there was a lingering memory, that premonition she'd felt before she'd decided not to leave the house. The sense that something larger was at work, coordinating unseen details. And the fact that the accident had actually happened, it defied any easy explanation. Clara now found herself between two worlds, that of logic and that of the invisible, and none of them seemed willing to back down. That afternoon she went into the children's room, sat on the floor beside the bed, and watched her children's little hands playing with the building blocks. It brought her a brief sense of relief. It was real, concrete, comforting, but at the same time she thought, if there is something beyond what we see, then perhaps the protection she felt wasn't just for her. Perhaps she was being guided because other lives depended on it too. It was then that he understood that he was not just questioning the dream, he was questioning the very structure of reality, as if a door had been opened and now it was impossible to pretend he didn't see what was on the other side. Clara then tried to rationalize. She read articles about premonitory dreams, about neuroscience, about brain mechanisms during REM sleep. She tried to find technical, logical, empirical answers, and she found some. But none of them explained why she had seen, with such precision, the exact stretch of road where the accident would happen, nor why the sensation she had was so vivid, so real, as if she had actually driven through it. The dilemma intensified, because the more she sought a logical answer, the further she moved away from the emotional truth that pulsed within her. And that is where the deepest point of this story lies, the point where many people get lost. Most people ignore these internal signals because they don't know how to deal with what they can't control. They would rather label everything as coincidence than admit that there is a greater intelligence at work. But Clara could no longer return to automatic mode. The dream had passed through her. The doubt was no longer if there was something beyond. The question now was, what does this something want to show me? And this question, more than any answer, was what changed the way she began to see the small decisions of everyday life. Because the conflict between reason and intuition is not a war to be won. It is an invitation to listen, to silently and presently listen to that which we often ignore because it seems illogical. How many times have you felt a tightness in your chest before making a decision? How many times have you changed your path for no apparent reason? How many times has something inside you said, "No way," and you went and then regretted it? These small, seemingly unconnected experiences are fragments of an inner map that Few allow themselves to explore. Clara was just beginning to draw hers, and meanwhile at night the dream world was preparing itself again. She didn't know it, but the next message was already on its way. Because there is a very specific moment when the veil between what is visible and what is invisible begins to tear, and this moment has everything to do with what Clara would experience the following night. Something that would touch, not only her mind, but her very identity. Comment here. That makes sense to me if you have ever experienced this type of conflict between what you think and what you feel, and you know how challenging it is to trust the invisible when everything around you demands proof. The next morning, Clara could still feel the remnants of the dream, as if they were fragments of a memory that she had not experienced in the physical world, but that had somehow touched her inside. It was like being between two worlds, one where everything follows, the flow of visible rules, safe routines and expected commitments, and another where a hidden truth seems to whisper in the silent moments asking for attention. She got up, dressed herself mechanically, organized the children's breakfast, and left the house with the same bag on her shoulder and the same attentive look at the clock. It was an ordinary Tuesday, at least it seemed to be. Traffic was as she knew it, a little heavy just outside the neighborhood, then clearing up as she got closer to the main road. But that day something different happened. As he was about to turn left, taking his usual route to work, he felt an inexplicable discomfort. It wasn't fear. It was a feeling similar to that of someone about to repeat a known mistake. Clara tightened, her grip on the steering wheel. The turn signal was already on, but her foot hesitated on the pedal, and then that inner voice, the same one she had tried to rationalize in the previous days, came back. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a clear warning. It was just a soft certainty. Trust. She turned off her blinker. Without understanding exactly why, she turned right. She changed route. A route she hadn't taken in months, maybe years. Longer, slower, but at that moment it seemed like the only one that made sense. She drove in silence. There was no music. No news on the radio. Just her, the car, and that strange feeling of being driven. Doubt began to creep in. Was she overreacting? Was it just paranoia caused by the dream? Could it be that, deep down, she just wanted to escape from her routine for a day? But a few minutes later, her phone began to vibrate in the passenger seat. Messages were arriving one after the other, first from a friend at work, then from the condominium group, then local news alerts. Clara pulled over to the side of the road, picked up the phone and read them. A serious accident had just happened, right on the stretch of road she used every day, at the same time she would normally be passing by there. For a few seconds, Clara stood still. Breathing failed. Time seemed to stop. She felt as if she were suspended between two realities, one where she had followed her instincts and dodged the impact, and another where perhaps she had been a part of it. Photos of the accident began to circulate in the groups. She recognized the place. It was the same scene from her dream, the same stretch, the same curve, the same angle of view that had startled her awake 2 days earlier. Now, however, it was no longer a fragment of a dream, it was a headline. Clara pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. She couldn't control the trembling in her hands. Her heart was beating wildly, not from fear but from a strange gratitude mixed with amazement. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. She knew deep down that she had been spared something. And not just spared. She had been warned. It was at this moment that the transformation began to happen. Not on the outside, but on the inside. Because Clara wasn't the mystical type, she didn't follow gurus, she didn't believe everything she heard. She was down to earth, analytical, demanding, with her own perceptions. But there, in that moment, she understood that there is a point where the mind cannot reach, and that it takes humility to recognize when something greater is acting, even if it goes against everything she has always believed to be rational. And most disturbing of all, what if she hadn't listened? That question kept reverberating in his mind like a disturbing echo. What if you had ignored the discomfort? What if you had gone on autopilot? What if I had gone? This fine line between life as she knew it and an outcome that could have been tragic made her realize how much we walk on invisible threads every day. Clara continued her journey through unfamiliar streets. The path seemed calmer, greener, almost like a refuge, and on that alternative route, she saw more than landscapes. She saw possibilities. She thought about the many times she ignored internal warnings, the times she forced decisions just because they seemed right on paper, but were wrong in her heart. She realized that trusting in the invisible is a type of courage that no one teaches. It is almost an act of silent rebellion against what the world expects you to do. When he arrived at work, he parked his car and stood inside for a few minutes, watching people crossing the street, checking their phones in a hurry. He felt a deep connection with everyone there, because now he understood how many would also be ignoring their own signs. It wasn't about predicting the future. It was about being awake enough to notice when the future whispers before it happens. And that, Clara now knew, requires listening. An internal listening, clear of the external noise. She entered the building and went upstairs instead of taking the elevator. Each step was a symbol of the new perception that was emerging, that there are choices that don't make sense on the surface, but that transform everything on deep levels. And that sometimes salvation lies in a detail, changing route, being 5 minutes late, listening to that silent discomfort instead of stifling it. Now, what had previously seemed strange, this inner calling came to be seen by Clara as a compass. She didn't know yet where all this would lead her, but one thing was certain: she couldn't ignore it any longer. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what Clara would experience in the following days would reveal an even more complex layer of this journey, something that goes beyond logic and touches on her most intimate decisions, affecting not only her routine, but the way she saw the world, people, and even her own destiny. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. If you've ever experienced something similar, that moment when everything seemed normal, but one seemingly small decision changed absolutely everything, and it was precisely in this state of sharper perception that Clara began to notice small signs that had previously gone unnoticed. Details in conversations, curious coincidences, decisions that had previously seemed automatic and now required presence. It was as if, by trusting that first impulse for change, she had opened a new window of perception, capable of revealing what had always been there, but camouflaged amidst haste, fear, and routine. And if you also feel like you're in a moment like this and where everything seems to point to a turning point, but there's still a lack of clarity about us follow, there is some additional material that can help you. It is something I prepared especially for those who connected with this content, reading from your birth angel. This material is practical and straight to the point, and can help you connect with personalized guidance from the angelic kingdom to go through these powerful transformations with more clarity and less wear and tear. Sometimes all it takes is a little push to see the direction clearly. If it makes sense to you, take a look at the material I left below. It complements what we talked about here and can save you a lot of time in practice. It's in the description, but I might take it down in the next few days. So if it's useful for your journey, take advantage of it while it's still available. Now back to Clara. The call came with an urgent tone, sharp as a razor on distracted skin. Clara answered, without thinking twice. On the other end of the line, a breathless voice warned, "Did you see what happened? That curve near the bridge, there was a horrible accident. They're saying there was a fatality." The ground dropped away from beneath her feet for a moment. Not because it was someone she knew, there were no names yet, but because Sheyu knew exactly which stretch they were talking about. It was her usual route, the road she took almost automatically, every day at the same time. That same route. She avoided that morning because of a feeling that no one but her would understand. It was as if time stopped for a few seconds. The noise around her became an echo, distant, almost silent. Clara held the phone tightly, trying to keep her fingers steady. Her heart was racing, her mind trying to piece together the logic of it all. What was coincidence, after all? What was intuition, and what was protection? She hung up without being able to say much. She walked to the office window, looked at the cloudy sky, and the thought came dry, direct, without beating around the bush. I could be there. This idea hit her with a silent force the kind that doesn't scream but leaves a mark, the kind of impact that doesn't leave a bruise on the outside but changes everything on the inside. There was no spectacle, there was no miraculous vision, no light from heaven breaking through the clouds, just a dense silence full of meaning filling the space, and one certainty: what she felt that morning, it was no coincidence. It was as if she had heard a subtle whisper amidst the noise of the world, and, this time, she had the courage to listen. Now imagine what would have happened if Clara had ignored that feeling, if she had convinced herself that it was just in her head, that the real world doesn't work like that, that everything requires logic, proof, calculation. Maybe she was in that car, maybe it was her, but it wasn't. And that changes everything, because there are decisions in life that seem too small to have big consequences. Changing the route to work, saying no to something that was always yes, respond to an impulse that seems irrational. But that's where the twist lies. It is behind the scenes of these silent choices that life often saves us from pain we never even know about. And at the same time, this is where deeper questions arise. How many times have we ignored signs like this? How many times has rushing routine, the fear of appearing fragile or too mystical, made us drown out that inner voice? Because, let's be honest, it's not always easy to trust a feeling that doesn't come with an instruction manual. But what happened to Clara wasn't about superstition. It was about presence, about perception, and above all about transformation. Because after that day, she stopped being just someone who listened to her intuition every now and then. She started to notice the details more, to pay attention to what she felt, before to make decisions, and above all to respect that kind of silence that carries more honest answers than many shouted arguments. It wasn't a radical change overnight. It was like realigning your inner compass step by step until you realized something bigger was at play, that behind small decisions there were messages, and maybe life is always trying to talk to us, but we're not always listening. And here comes a hidden truth that few people admit. Most of our choices are guided by something that goes beyond logic. We rationalize later, try to give it a nice name, justify it, but in essence, it is intuition that points the way. That spark that ignites when something simply makes sense, even for no apparent reason. The difference is in who decides to listen and who chooses to ignore. Clara decided to listen, and it saved her life. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this type of experience doesn't happen by chance. There is a frequency behind these encounters and disagreements. And when you start to align with it, everything changes, from the small decisions of the day to those twists and turns that transform entire destinies. Comment here. I'm on this journey too, if this content spoke to something inside you. That moment, Anna felt a certainty that transcended reasoning. This was not just any dream, an image lost in the early hours of the morning, or the fruit of a tired imagination. It was something deeper, a silent warning, a sign that came from a greater source, a divine intervention that in some way manifested itself to protect her. It was not easy to put into words, but the weight of that feeling changed something inside her, something that went beyond fear, doubt, and even her understanding of what is real. It was a liberation, a breath of life saying, I am here. And you are not alone. This perception is not exclusive to Anna. Many people at crucial moments report feeling a presence that defies logic, an invisible force that acts behind the scenes of our lives, as if a greater plan were in motion. These are stories that speak of encounters with signs, of inexplicable sensations, of dreams that become maps and not mere meaningless stories. These experiences reveal a hidden truth about the human journey, that we are not simply at the mercy of chance or circumstance, but that there are unseen guides who act to lead us, to warn us, to preserve our path. The impact of this spiritual intervention goes far beyond the immediate moment. It is a transformation in mindset, a silent change that makes a person begin to see the world and their own decisions in a different light. Anna, for example, began to realize that choices that previously seemed trivial had much greater weight, that her intuition, that inner voice that we so often ignore, was a powerful tool for navigating life's complex crossroads. She understood that there is a flow of energy and wisdom that can be accessed when we let go of skepticism and make room for the unseen. This type of intervention, which many call angelic intervention or a sign from God, has a profound impact on how we deal with the journey that is proposed to us. It is an invitation to reevaluate our connection with the divine, to recognize that we are not alone, even in the most challenging times. What happens is a kind of spiritual awakening, where the boundaries between the mundane and the sacred become blurred, and we begin to understand that our life is made up of moments that go far beyond what we can see or explain. What's more, this experience teaches us something essential about the decisions that shape our destiny. The courage to listen to an inner voice, to follow a sign without guarantees, to trust in what is not tangible can be the difference between a safe path and a dive into the unknown. And this connects us to a universal truth, to a mindset of openness and transformation that goes far beyond personal beliefs. It's about positioning yourself as the protagonist of your own story, but also as part of a larger plot where every decision has an impact, every choice is a step towards a more authentic version of ourselves. Often behind the scenes in life, what seems like coincidence is actually a series of revelations in disguise. The messages don't arrive in the spotlight, but rather in subtle ways that demand attention and sensitivity. It takes courage to recognize these moments, to accept the responsibility of acting on them, and to integrate this new perception into our routine and our worldview. Anna learned that this journey is not just about avoiding dangers, but about connecting with a wisdom that elevates the spirit, expands consciousness, and drives transformation. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we begin to understand the nature of these interventions, we discover that they are not exceptions, but rather part of the fabric of life. They show us that the universe is in constant dialogue with us, offering clues so that we can navigate the storms with greater clarity and strength. It is a paradigm shift that reveals the backstage of destiny, where faith and reason intertwine, and where decisions are nourished by a spiritual connection that can be felt, even when it cannot be explained. This movement of transformation is powerful because it places us before a fundamental choice: to continue living on autopilot, ignoring the signs, or to open ourselves to the possibility that our journey may be guided by a greater intelligence. It's not about denying logic or science, but about recognizing that reality is multifaceted and that there are dimensions of human experience that have yet to be fully explored. This openness has an impact not only on what happens outside, but on what happens inside, on our mentality, on the way we make decisions, on the way we interpret life and its complexities. Therefore, understanding and integrating these spiritual interventions is more than just a curiosity or a belief. It is a practical tool for those who seek to live with more purpose and authenticity. It is an invitation to go behind the scenes of one's own existence and discover that, even in the face of uncertainty, there is a guiding light, a path that reveals itself, and a meaning that transcends immediacy. Comment below: this makes sense to me. If this reflection touches something inside you and inspires you to look at your own story from this new perspective, how can we explain something like this? Coincidence? Intuition? Or are there really invisible forces protecting us, guiding every step we take when everything seems uncertain? The question echoes silently within anyone who has experienced something similar: an inexplicable deliverance, a sudden sense of alertness, a change of course that saved a life or avoided a disaster. It is the kind of experience that does not fit into the traditional formulas of rational thought, but that has such a profound impact that it changes the way we see reality. Anna was not the only one. Thousands of people around the world report episodes that defy any logical explanation. These are surprising stories, often recorded behind the scenes of ordinary life, told by people who never considered themselves mystics or religious, but who found themselves facing something greater than themselves. Drivers who suddenly slow down for no apparent reason and escape fatal accidents. Mothers who wake up in the middle of the night with an uncontrollable feeling and discover that their children were in danger. people who change their route out of instinct and avoid tragedies. These stories are repeated in different places, cultures, and contexts, as if there were an invisible intelligence acting all around us. Many spiritual experts, including serious researchers, argue that these episodes should not be dismissed as mere figments of the imagination. Renowned authors, therapists, scholars of ancient traditions, and even contemporary neuroscientists have explored the idea that there are invisible guides and protectors all around us, spiritual entities, energy fields, connections that we cannot yet measure but that are perceived by those who are attentive. This is not just a matter of faith, but a field of inquiry that challenges the boundaries of what we call objective reality. This is a hidden truth that few people have the courage to explore in depth. The universe may be constantly communicating with us, just in ways that our five senses can't easily capture. That's where intuition comes in, not as a vague or mystical feeling, but as a legitimate tool of perception. When you feel an inner warning, when something tugs you to change direction for no rational reason, it may not be just a random thought. It may be a kind of communication that comes from a higher place, a spiritual vibration that connects with our consciousness. And no, this is not mystical talk disconnected from reality. Great names like Carl Jung, for example, have studied this type of experience. Jung spoke of synchronicity, events that are connected not by cause and effect, but by meaning. It is as if the universe was silently conspiring to make certain things happen at the right time. These episodes, often described as miraculous or mystical, are signs of a larger and more complex structure than the simple linear logic of modern science. It is important to understand that science, with all its power and precision, does not have all the answers. In fact, scientists themselves recognize that there are many more questions than certainties when it comes to consciousness, spirituality, and what happens behind the scenes of existence. What we call reality is still an incomplete puzzle. And perhaps precisely in this space between what is known and what is yet to be discovered lies the place where angels operate, not necessarily with wings and harps, but as subtle manifestations of protection, love, and guidance. The point here is not to prove it, but to realize it. Because when you allow yourself to open your mind, and more than that, your heart, to this possibility, something changes. Your mindset expands. You start to make decisions with more awareness. You start to trust the signs, to observe the details, to respect the silence. And almost invisibly, the impact of this becomes real. You realize that there is something guiding you even when everything seems dark, that there are invisible hands holding yours even when you feel no support around you. This realization can be a turning point for many people. It is as if, from this moment on, a new phase in life's journey begins, a new level of sensitivity, responsibility, and connection. Because if you truly believe that there is a higher intelligence taking care of you, then you also feel called to take charge of your own path with more respect, more dedication, and more presence. It is no longer about waiting for everything to resolve itself, but about walking in partnership with that which is invisible, but extremely real. And perhaps behind every sudden silence, every unexpected shiver, every impossible coincidence, there is a message, a revelation, a calling. And if you can listen carefully, if you are willing to go beyond conventional explanations, you may discover a new kind of truth, one that transforms, not because it is spoken, but because it is felt. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a curious pattern in these accounts, something that connects all these stories in a surprising way, and reveals that perhaps we are not only being protected, but also being prepared for something much bigger. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. If this idea touched a nerve within you, how many times have you ignored a sign? Maybe it was just a silly delay, something out of the ordinary, a different path you took without thinking much. But what if it wasn't random? What if what you thought was just a detail out of place was, in fact, a deliberate detour placed there by something bigger? Maybe an angel trying to protect you, warn you, or even guide you in a better direction. The truth is that, in the rush of everyday life, we learn to ignore this type of thing. Society teaches us to be logical, practical, objective, But in this rush to rationalize everything, we move away from something essential, our sensitivity. That ability to perceive the invisible, to hear the silence, to capture what is between the lines of life. And that is precisely where the signs appear. In the details, in the delays, in the inconveniences, in the insistent coincidences. You don't need to live surrounded by candles or be immersed in spirituality to notice this. You just need to pay attention, because these signs don't shout, they whisper, and only those who are truly present can hear them. It's as if the universe is constantly sending you little messages, but if you're distracted, with your mind on autopilot, you can spend your entire life without noticing them. And that's no exaggeration. Many decisions that completely change the course of our journey begin with a small inconvenience, a strange feeling, a something wrong that we can't explain, but we feel it. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times you felt something and yet ignored it? How many times did you let go of that intuition, that butterflies in your stomach, that inner voice that told you not to go, or not to trust, or to wait just a little longer? Most people experience these situations, but only later, when something goes wrong, do they remember the feeling they had before, and they say, "I knew it." But the problem is that knowing later doesn't change what happened. That's why trusting your perception is an attitude that requires courage. Because listening to your intuition often means swimming against the tide, making decisions that no one understands, and following paths that have no guarantee of safety, only a deep feeling that it is the right thing to do. And if you think this is weakness or insecurity, know that it is exactly the opposite. Trusting in the invisible without immediate proof is a powerful form of wisdom. It is a type of strength that is not taught in books or learned in formulas. It is something that comes from connecting with who you really are, and with something bigger that surrounds you all the time. The signs are there, every day. Sometimes they come disguised as obstacles, other times in the form of unlikely encounters, random messages, conversations that stir something inside you. It is not about looking for signs in everything, but rather about cultivating an awakened mindset, one that recognizes when something resonates differently, as if it were tailor-made for that moment in your life. Some people call it intuition. Others prefer to use words like spiritual guide, guardian angel, or instinct. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that this perception exists, and when you start to respect it, something extraordinary happens. You stop being just someone who reacts to the world, and you start to move with purpose. You start to make decisions with more confidence, and more than that, you start to live with more presence, with more dedication, because you understand that you are not alone. This is one of the greatest revelations that life can bring, realizing that everything is connected, that the behind the scenes of what we live is full of intelligence, love, and purpose. Even in the easy, darkest moments there are signs. Even in pain there is guidance, even in loss there is a calling. But all of this can only be perceived by those who decide to pay attention, by those who no longer treat life as a set of coincidences, but as a guided journey. And this change in mindset transforms everything. Because when you start aligning with these signs, your choices become clearer. You attract situations that are more consistent with your essence, and what once seemed confusing starts to make sense, like pieces of a puzzle that finally fit together. It's as if life starts to respond to you with more fluidity, more synchronicity, more lightness. But this doesn't happen by chance. It happens when you decide to trust your deepest feelings, the silent messages, the strange deviations along the way. And don't think that trusting the signs means living passively, waiting for everything to fall from the sky. On the contrary, this is an active stance. It's a state of alertness, of listening, of openness. It's being present enough to perceive what is being shown, even if it goes against what you expected, even if it takes you out of your comfort zone. And it's precisely in these moments, when you allow yourself to be guided, that the greatest leaps of growth happen, because the signs don't just point to protection. Many times they indicate direction. And sometimes, what you interpret as a loss can actually be a push towards something infinitely greater, Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is an even more revealing layer behind these signs, a silent truth that connects what you feel with what you attract, and that can completely transform the way you see your role in this journey. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If you've ever had the feeling that you were being guided, even without understanding exactly how because when we talk about signs, intuition, these invisible touches that seem to come out of nowhere, there is something even more fascinating behind all of this. There is a kind of silent intelligence operating behind the scenes of our lives, and it is much more precise than any rational planning. It sees what our eyes cannot see. It anticipates situations that our mind cannot even imagine, and above all, it respects our time, but always tries to reach us, even through a strange dream, an unexplained malaise, or a seemingly ordinary encounter. Maybe you've never stopped to think about it like this, but many deliverances you've had, often disguised as frustrations, cancellations, people leaving, or opportunities that went wrong, were actually answers. Answers to prayers that you may not have said out loud, but that your heart was already screaming. And this is where things become even more real. Signs don't just appear to warn you about dangers or bad choices. They also appear to prepare you, to open your perception, to tune your soul to what you need to experience and not just what you want. Some people call this divine protection. Others prefer to call it destiny. The label doesn't matter. What really matters is recognizing the impact of this force on the details of life. Because when you learn to recognize this, you no longer live in a constant struggle with reality. You begin to realize that there is an order to things, even when everything seems chaotic. You begin to trust the process more, even without understanding why there are delays, losses, or deviations. This trust changes everything. It doesn't eliminate challenges, but it completely transforms your attitude toward them. And do you know what's even more curious? Sometimes the greatest signs come disguised as silence. That's right. Silence can be a spiritual cry. When everything goes silent, when nothing happens, when it seems like you're stuck in time, this is also a kind of answer. A call to look inside, to listen to what you've been avoiding. Because while you're running after answers out, there maybe what you need is precisely in the emptiness that bothers you. It's in this space that great revelations are born. And often, the angel you expected to come with trumpets and wings appears as a subtle discomfort, like a restlessness. That won't leave you alone until you decide to change. And there's more. There's a pattern in the stories of those who choose to listen. When you talk to people who have been through very difficult times but managed to get through them and come out stronger, almost all of them will tell you the same thing. Something told me not to go. Or, I felt like I had to wait. Or, I dreamed about this before it happened. This is no coincidence. It's as if the invisible is constantly trying to warn you. But those who are on autopilot, numb to routine, rarely listen. That's why it's so important to slow down every now and then. Breathe, observe, question, feel. Because it's in these moments that you reconnect with that natural sensitivity that modern life tries to stifle. And the most beautiful thing about all this is that the more you allow yourself to listen, the clearer the signs become. The more the warnings come directly to you, as if a channel had been reopened between you and something greater. And suddenly you find yourself making better choices, moving away from toxic environments, refusing proposals that once seemed irresistible, but that now you feel, with every cell in your body, are not for you. This kind of clarity cannot be bought. It cannot be learned in a course. It comes from a deep connection with the invisible. And this is where a transformative revelation comes in. Signs don't just come to save you from what's hurting you. They also come to push you toward what heals you. Sometimes you find yourself in uncomfortable places, in situations that seem to tear you apart. But deep down, all of that is aligning you with a new version of yourself. A version that is more conscious, more awake, more connected to your truth. You start to realize that everything that fell apart wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. It was the call you needed to wake up, to change course, to stop betraying yourself in the name of something that no longer makes sense. And when you experience this firsthand, something inside you changes forever. Because you never look at a no the same way again. You never treat a loss as just a loss again. You begin to see the hidden impact behind each difficult moment. You begin to trust in the wisdom of cycles. And you understand, once and for all, that not everything that hurts is punishment. Sometimes it's exactly the opposite. It's care, it's deliverance, it's direction. And now tell me, have you ever been through this? Have you ever had a dream that warned you? Have you ever felt that an intuition saved you from something? Has something seemingly silly happened that later turned out to be a great sign? If so, share it in the comments. Maybe what you experienced is exactly what someone needs to hear right now. Maybe your story is the sign that someone has been asking for today. And if you believe that angels exist, and that they find unlikely, ways to talk to us, leave A in the comments. Because sometimes a simple emoji is also a way of spreading faith, a way of reminding us that we are not alone on this journey. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a hidden pattern among those who begin to trust these signs, and this is precisely where many powerful transformations begin to happen. If you've made it this far, it's because this conversation made sense somewhere deep down, inside you, and that's exactly why it's worth following along on this journey. So if this kind of reflection touches you, if you feel the need to continue nurturing this connection with something bigger, subscribe to the channel now. There's a lot of good stuff coming, and we're going to delve even deeper into these topics that touch the soul. And tell me in the comments, just so I know you stayed until the end. Right. This message was for me. I'd love to see who's followed. Me this far. Oh, and leave a like too. Not for the video itself, but for everything this exchange has awakened in you. That's how we keep this energy flowing. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue. With me there. The conversation is not over yet.